Chicago, 12 people were killed and nearly 60 shot over the weekend. Mayor Rahm Emanuel is now calling for even stronger gun control laws, telling a group of officers, quote, "It is not just about how many police you have, Rahm Emanuel. It is about the quantity of guns that are on the street, so we actually have gun laws that back up the men and women we just recognize. And if you can make head nor tails of what the mayor just said, let me know." Joining us now to discuss what's behind the violence in our cities and the war against law enforcement in this country, Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clarke. Sheriff, great to have you with us. Let me ask you, Mayor Rahm Emanuel just said it's all about the guns, not the people using them, and so legal guns in the hands of citizens should be taken away. What do you make of it?
You know, Rahm Emanuel is dead wrong. He must have gone to the same school that President Barack Obama did on how to run a law enforcement agency. This is what happens when you have community organizers and academic elites and others who don't know a thing about policing in the American ghetto start to dabble in police science. Look, I know from my 37 years of experience, Lou, that cops matter, and the number of cops that you have can make a difference as long as you allow them to do within our Constitution, as long as you allow them to do assertive policing, aggressive policing, things like broken windows and other initiatives that are going to put the bad guys on their heels, but instead Rahm Emanuel reaches into his bag of tricks and he pulls out a gun control talking point, and that's kind of what we have. The city of Chicago is under siege, and this is not anything recent with them. And we saw, as you mentioned, what happened in Baltimore over the weekend. These cities might as well get used to it, because this is what you're going to have as long as you're going to try to turn cops into social workers and you're going to try to get them to emphasize de-escalation and more dialogue instead of going on the offensive to go after some very dangerous individuals.
And those dangers are rising, in part because we're watching gangs, it seems, multiply monthly in this country. It is a national crisis, and yet the president doesn't talk about it at all. The Attorney General doesn't address the issue at all, and seems to be more interested in investigating police departments rather than being part of a national law enforcement strategy that assures public safety.
It's starting to take its toll on the American police officer, the psyche of the American police officer. Self-initiated policing is going to go down. Proactive policing is going to go down in many of these areas, and cops are just going to resort to answering calls for service. That's what they're paid to do. That's what they're expected to do. We need them to take those risks sometimes. So in a self-initiated act, to pull that car over, that you have reasonable suspicion to do so, or to go jack up, as we call it, the group of gang members hanging on the corner to find out if they have drugs or weapons. But the way they're looking at it now, why should they risk their life or end up on some criminal indictment because this whole thing has been politicized? So instead, the President of the United States and others, as Rahm Emanuel did, continue to deflect away from the behavior of many young black males in the American ghetto and instead pile on the law enforcement officer. But Lou, as you know, in the end, the loser in all this are the good, law-abiding black people that live in these ghettos, and there are a lot of them.
Yeah, and they seem to be the last consideration here. They're being, if you will, targeted by propaganda, principally from the left, a power structure that really is using them for political purposes rather than providing services. It is extraordinary. I mean, we can go back 50 years and look at some of the early writings of Daniel Patrick Moynihan, Nathan Glazer's Street Corner Society. The problems aren't changing. The responses aren't changing. And the failures are immense. And we continue to permit, as you say, a mayor to deflect from his or her responsibilities in the case of Baltimore and their service in elected office. They are the ones failing millions of people in this country, and yet it goes on and on and on without response politically and from the American people.
Well, here's what has to happen. You have to eradicate the American ghetto. How do you do that? You have to shrink the size of the underclass. We're seeing underclass behaviors on display. We have a permanent underclass in the United States that become comfortable with ghetto life. How do we get them out of that comfort zone? as you mentioned, you go after modern liberalism. Modern liberalism is conduct without borders. It celebrates black underachievement. It makes excuses for this abhorrent behavior that we're seeing in many of these neighborhoods. It blames others for questionable lifestyle choices like school failure, having kids out of wedlock, not staying constantly employed. So I would start by attacking modern liberalism, start to shame these behaviors instead of celebrating them, make it uncomfortable, and then you'll see the underclass behaviors start to shrink.
Sheriff David Clarke, it is always good to talk with you. Thanks for being here.